No, I can't go to that.
Hey, J-Mac. Move that camera over.
Yeah, I got your back.
That way. Up.
No way we're kicking.
Up. Good.
Yeah, he's giving us notes.
Are you kidding me?
Okay, here we go. Caleb, welcome to December, all right? It's the home stretch of the mythical first half of the year. Of course, the first half doesn't end until you get back, and there's 2 weeks left, I think, before the grading period ends. However, the mythical first half, once we get by Christmas, we are basically on the other side of your sophomore or freshman year. We have any juniors in here? A couple seniors in second period. All right, Lafayette, we are here. By the way, welcome to the remote students and welcome to those students on the field trip. So we'll find out who does what they're supposed to do when they miss class. Annie, you're supposed to, whether you're on a field trip or for whatever reason, the cool thing is about this class is you could, at 10:50, tune in right there. If you're at home, you don't feel well, I can still go to U.S. history class, just go on YouTube Live, boom, watch it, or anytime thereafter. So hopefully those that are getting home from their German field trip this evening are tuning in.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking in the present tense because it's like they're just tuning in, right? 8 hours later. Going on for 4 years. America is trying to stay out of it. Our president got elected, John, with the campaign slogan, he kept us out of war. America did not want any part of this war, you understand? Why would we get involved 3,000 miles away in a war that isn't really affecting us right here at home? It's going to affect some people. You know, if you have a business and you're involved in international trade, of course it's going to affect you. If you have investments, it's going to affect you. But physically, America is not being threatened, right, Dina? So why would we get involved? No, we don't want to. What forced the issue? Give me a couple things that forced the issue for America that, you know what, we had to do it. Yeah.
Germany was thinking.
Right. Now, they had been doing that, haven't they? Right? Lusitania, hey, we gave them a stern warning. Sussex, hey, you better not do that again. And they kind of phased it out, but then they, Germany said, that's it. From now on, all ships are fair game. So they started doing it again. America got fed up. Was there any other reason? Yeah.
They were trying to get Mexico to attack us.
Yeah, that was a big thing. You don't lose sight of that. America's trying to stay out of it, but when the communication was intercepted, it was actually British intelligence that intercepted the communication. Germany was trying to incite Mexico and trying to tell Mexico that they were going to help Mexico regain lands that they had lost in the Mexican-American War, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. Mexico was like, if we help you out, so they wanted America to be preoccupied with Mexico so that they wouldn't come over, because it was kind of like everybody knew, even though America wasn't prepared for war, that if America got involved, that was really going to help the Allies' cause, right? And by 1918, Germany really understands that. We're going to find out today that Germany was ready to end it. Germany, about 4 years later, almost 4 years later, was like, okay, remember we said 1915 to 19, what was that word we used? Stalemate or deadlock, right? That trench warfare, even though sometimes they were only 50 yards apart, they kind of stayed in their trenches for the most part. No one wanted to venture out into no man's land. But by 1918, Germany says, we have had enough. Did I tell you why they're called doughboys?
Yeah.
Why was it? Okay. Yeah,
They look
like dumplings. And we talked about how the French troops, the morale, you didn't have that yet? The morale was so low among some of the Allied troops, especially the French. It's been 3.5 years. We're done with this. We're not winning. Some of them deserted. Some of them killed their commanding officers before they left. It was that bad. America's entrance revived their spirits. And there's something called the Spring Offensive of 1918. Is this new for you? Okay, Spring Offensive 1918. Who goes on the offense? The Germans go on the offense. The Germans have had enough too. It's like, hey, it's time. We've got everything the way, we got it set up just like we want. We need to start rolling. Remember that Schlieffen plan that they thought they were going to go and take Paris in a couple weeks? Well, 3.5 years later, they're thinking, now's the time. Up in the north, and when I say north, that means northern France or Belgium, the Germans went on an overwhelming offensive, tried to overwhelm the British forces and break through their lines. As you see, over a 4-day period, with 6,000 guns and tons of explosives, over a 4-hour siege, they thought that they would just break the British line because they were overwhelming them. There's one thing, though. There was one thing that kept the Germans from overwhelming the Brits with this 4-hour siege. Guess what it was? Your teacher asked this with a patriotic smile on his face. What stopped the Germans, or who stopped the Germans? Who was very much a part of the reason that the Germans didn't overwhelm the Brits like they thought they were going to with this incredible surge? Who could it be, Jamin?
America.
The Americans. And I'm not, listen, I know you know how much I love America, but I'm not standing here today to like overdo it. It's just a fact. The entrance of the American military, the American men into World War I turned the tide. Things were not going well. Like we said, French soldiers were deserting. They were done. Make sense? So that happens in the north. So the Germans, remember the Schlieffen plan, they go, okay, we didn't quite break the lines, but we did a lot of damage to them up north. And now let's turn our attention to the south and let's go ahead and take Paris. So the Germans start their surge towards Paris, end of May, early June. Guess who gets there just in time? Once again, Americans, the Yanks. The Yanks are coming. That's why they were throwing parades in Europe when we finally sent our troops over. And just in time, we halt the Germans. Listen, they got within 50 miles of Paris again. You remember way back at the beginning of your notes, they got close to Paris at the Battle of the Marne, on the Marne River. They got there again. And these are the two places, I know they're tough to pronounce, Chateau Thierry and Belleau Wood. Those are the two places that the American troops especially dug in and kept the Germans from getting to Paris. So those are in italics because those are the ones you got to know. These two battlefields were the ones where the Americans were most productive in not allowing the Germans to get to Paris. Chateau Thierry and Belleau Wood. So close in the spring of 1918 to the war being over and the Germans winning. We get to the summer. Now that the Allies have held off the German assault, now it's our turn. Now we're going on the move. We become the aggressors. The turning point of the war. You know how we always talk about wars? We have a turning point, right? Civil War, Gettysburg. Right? There's a turning point in wars. What was the turning point? America's entry. The American fighting man entering the war. The tide has turned. We are now going to go on the offensive. When I say we, I mean allies with a capital I, right? There's a bunch of alliances. A lot of countries are allies. But when we say the allies, it's almost like with a capital A because that means the good guys. Right, Dina? That is, in this case, France, Great Britain, Russia, and then when we get there, America. We are now on the offense. We are driving the Germans back. What are you quick today? She's like, today? All right, moving on. So it's a pretty relatively short period of time American troops are involved, right? But what an impact they had. What's a synonym for armistice? Anybody know? There's a word in your vocabulary that I know you know. It's a synonym for armistice. If you're having an argument with someone, or you could be someone that you're like friends with, and you have a falling out or something, and you want to make amends, you want to make peace. You say, hey, can we just call a truce? There you go. Armistice is just a fancy word for truce. So that's where we're headed. This slide's entitled Armistice because once the Allies go on the aggression, we're going to find out something. You know, the big bad Germans that were all for this war, the Germans that instigated the war, the Germans that thought that they were going to dominate all of Europe. Well, once the tide has turned and we go on the offensive, it's not going to be too long before they start saying, hey, can we take a time out here? Can we kind of negotiate here and talk about this? What do you think the French are going to say at that point? No. Like sports analogy, you're in a basketball game, you're getting beat, right? Other team's up by 15, all of a sudden you start coming back. You cut the lead, you tie the game, and the other team says, hey, can we take a break right now? No! Maybe like the Super Bowl when you guys are young, lights go out. Hey, we're losing. What if all the lights go out? Who was it? St. Gold. The long runs away. Okay, we're gonna highlight this battle because you have those two battles that we mentioned earlier. St. Mihiel is the first battlefield where the United States military led the way. And those other places, American troops were called in just in time to stop the Germans. Now that we're on the offensive, this is the first major battle where the U.S. is leading the Allied charge. And you're going to hear about this guy and this guy in a couple months when we talk about World War II. Those are major. Listen, if you don't know, if you've never heard of George Patton or Douglas MacArthur, maybe during Christmas break, you're like, hey, I'm bored. I'll put the controller down. I'll put my phone down. Or I'm going to have my phone. I'm going to look up, who is this George Patton Mr. Franklin's talking about? Or Douglas MacArthur. Incredible military leaders. If you're queasy, if you don't have a strong stomach, or you don't like, nobody likes war, I don't think, but if you're like, I don't know, then you don't want to hear George Patton's most famous speech. It doesn't fit in with today's politically correct way we speak, even about things as vicious and violent as war. But if you want to hear how men, because war means I win or I lose, and what the consequences of that are, you hear a man like George Patton speak, you'll see the difference in how faced war then compared to now. Anyway, American leadership, St. Mihiel. And now we get to the climactic event of the war. October of 1918. By the way, notice it says November 11th. When's Veterans Day? November 11th. It was originally called Armistice Day. I'm sure you've heard this in speeches throughout the years when you go to Veterans Day Chapel. It was originally called Armistice Day because this is that's the day that the war ended. That's the day on the field in Argonne Forest in France, the war came to an end. Unfortunately, there's a cost to war. And again, the war back then were much greater costs. Why? Because the technology was so that in order to defeat the enemy, you had to be at close range, right? The trenches were 50 yards apart. People today, not that you should be losing sleep, you should always be praying, but not to be losing sleep. But people today that fear World War III, if you try to picture or compare, what would that look like compared to the first two world wars? Probably going to look a lot different, right? Because technology doesn't demand that you are probably very rarely going to have to be hand-to-hand combat, right? We got drones now, right? Not only do we have smart missiles where we can, with precision, take out individual targets and have very little what they call collateral damage. Unfortunately, sometimes collateral damage includes human beings. We can take out targets with such precision that if we ever got into another big conflict like this, surely it would never be like this again, which we'll watch a video pretty soon, give you kind of a stark, if you've never seen war video, it might be a little disturbing to you, but at the end of the class, we're going to watch a documentary type film of the Battle of Argonne and maybe give you a little more appreciation for, it's one thing to sing and to think about patriotic songs and to think about and learn about the sacrifices that so many people made before your generation that allows you to live in the most free, prosperous country in the world. It's another thing to see it and try to think about what would you do? What would that have been like for you to be on that battlefield? How incredibly brave, and what an incredible sacrifice it was for what we have. But anyway, Americans send 250,000 troops spread out from here to Youngstown. 250,000 troops go on this offensive. Unfortunately, even though we're going to be victorious, 26,000 of those men, so approximately 10%, aren't going to come home. Almost half of them are going to be wounded. Unfortunately, the other unfortunate thing is these numbers are relatively small compared to what happened throughout the whole war. By the way, at the beginning of the year, we learned about the Civil War, right? Right? And now we started with Reconstruction, but I think did we mention how many died in the Civil War? Anybody remember? Or did we start with the Civil War? Yeah, we started. Oh, that's right. We started with yeah. So we had almost 700,000, right? Americans killing Americans. 6,000. That's 26,000 sons, brothers, fathers, right? It's not a small number, but relatively speaking, in World War I, our losses weren't that great. This is just in this one battle, though. So as the Americans, the Allies, are moving through the Argonne Forest and the Germans are on the retreat, all of a sudden, like I said, they want to say, whoa, wait. And the Kaiser, I say president, you say Kaiser. President, the leader of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, he starts getting on the horn, trying to get a hold of the German and French and American leaders saying, hey, can we start negotiating for peace here? You want to kind of end this? And what would you do if you were the French? No, we're not going to end this now until you are, if your negotiation is, yes, we surrender and we totally take the blame, sure. But Germany wasn't willing to do that. Germany wanted to negotiate, say, hey, we both suffered a lot of losses. Let's negotiate. and let's figure out who's gonna get what land, and the French are like, no, we're not gonna trust that. So they're not gonna listen to this, almost begging for peace now that you're on the run. And if you remember, it might have been mentioned every year, I think, Veterans Day Chapel. November is the 11th month, so on 11/11, at the 11th hour, war was over. The armistice was signed. Not a peace treaty, it's a stop to the fighting, but it does end up being the end of the war. At 11 o'clock. Well, here's the big numbers. 40 million people in Europe wounded or killed. 20 million dead. I talked a little bit ago about technology and how war has changed over the years. Half the people that died in World War I were civilians. If Germany was invading France and bombing, there was no concern for whether you were, I mean, I shouldn't say no concern, but there wasn't as much as we would have today. Like, hey, our country's at war against your country. You're not going to be responsible. If I'm the French and I'm fighting against Germany and some town in Germany gets bombed, I am not guilty. It is not my responsibility that your civilians are being killed. Guess whose it is? Yours. You don't want your civilians being killed? Call off the war. We don't think like that today, do we? We try to fight our wars, you know this term, politically correct. We don't like the fact that we go to war, that innocent people would get killed, right? We can have a whole class discussion on the morality of that. But so you're talking 10 million people that weren't even military people in Europe were killed during World War I. So again, they're not very explicit in the violence, but they're trying to give you a realistic view from the soldier's eyes of what it would be in the trench warfare of World War I. Lights, please. Very sobering video. Not going to be like, there's not even going to be any talking. Just the visuals with some quotes from soldiers. This is in the forest, the Argonne Forest at the end of World War I. And we mentioned, there's a great movie, 1917, I think we mentioned it yesterday if you haven't seen it, which will be more graphic than this. This will not be as graphic as 1917. But hopefully it makes you appreciate the sacrifices that people made for you to be sitting where you're sitting. Is that too loud? Remember we talked about those nights you're laying in the trench. One of the little legs in the taxi, and actually-
I ride with five.
I'd rather five. At home with kids.
Did you say test Monday?
Well, I'm trying to avoid it. It's probably gonna be Tuesday.
It's very important.
We won't get done until tomorrow.
That's literally impossible.
Legit.
Come on.
We literally picked off Lamar 4 times and we scored 2.
Lamar was doing two. Dude, some of the worst passes.
You see that one pass and then like you like and then you'll realize that like the actually like you just have easy interception. Yeah, it's just fun.
There is no one else who wants
Good job.
Bicycle built for two. You don't know that song?
Something you said more.
On a bicycle built to, what's that?
Something you said more movies.
Horror movies? I hope
I
not.
just ruined the song.
Come on, brother. You know, I almost drowned. I almost drowned.
The little cereal. They were
No, they
debating.
used to have a pool there. Get the name of the pool. You ever heard of it? The swimming pool there was called Bird Bath. But anyway, they had a low dive and a high dive. Guess where? In the same area. So it was like, the lifeguards would, I guess, make sure that someone went off the low dive, clear out there before someone went high dive. Somehow, I went off the low dive. And someone went off the high dive, and I'm underwater, and they land on me. Next thing I know, I'm being carried to the first aid place, like, I think the wind. Imagine the wind getting knocked out of you when you're underwater.
Oh.
What happened?
Bad enough, just give me big
How you doing, Pete?
I liked my seat.
What do you guys do?
Yeah.
All right, welcome to Wednesday, hump day. Isaiah. In a little bit, we'll be on the other side of the week, and it'll all be downhill. Isn't it amazing how fast it goes? Welcome back, Megan.
We only have like 2 more fools.
I know that you were making sure you watched the video. Something happened yesterday. And I went, oh no, and there's no video yesterday. So I'm sorry. I know you were eagerly looking for it. So Mondays should be up there.
Right, and what are you talking about,
Usually you're 2 hours. Everyone's like calling out. There's a bleep.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's the thing that's called Greek spirituality. It's an art culture. It's like you, it's a blending of all these different systems. It's kind of like our American.
I ate all the stuff he gave me when I got in the car. See,
We're like, oh, I'm 8.
Oh, yeah.
I will not.
No.
No. Wait.